Welcome to the Plant-Free MD podcast with Dr. Anthony Chaffee, where we discuss diet and nutrition and how this affects health and chronic disease, and show you how you can use this to optimize your health and happiness, both mentally and physically. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Plant-Free MD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and today I have a very special guest, good friend of mine, Dr. Matthew Phillips, joining us over from New Zealand. Matthew, good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
You too, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Matthew's a neurologist. I don't know if people may have seen some of his interviews with Dr. Baker and others, but he has been using diet and lifestyle interventions to help his neurology patients and critically thinking outside the box and looking at data and information in ways that not everybody does in a sort of the spoon-fed manner that we get in medical school and residency. So I've been really excited to have this conversation because we've had many conversations on our own, but I think everyone would be very interested in hearing your thoughts. So thank you for coming on. And if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself if people haven't come across you before.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Canadian originally, as you know, but others may not. And I decided to do some of my training in Canada and then some of my training in Australia. And I ended up doing most of my sort of general medicine and neurology training in Adelaide and Melbourne in Australia. And then I took 3 years out where I sort of opened up my mind. And I see those 3 years as a self-imposed fellowship because I didn't like any of the other options. I did do a 1-year fellowship before leaving in nerve and muscle studies. So that I did do a fellowship, but I wanted to do more. And so during those 3 years, I went to basically South America a year, Asia 1 year, and then Northern Australia, working in a place called Cairns for 1 year. And I did some volunteering, a lot of traveling and looking outside the box, as you say, and trying to think about different ways to help people with some of the really tough neurological disorders that I'd seen. Because I guess I just, it was pretty obvious to me that we didn't do a lot for some people, people with the bad cancers, neurological cancers, people with the bad neurodegenerative disorders, especially like Alzheimer's and ALS, the motor neuron disease, and Huntington's and so on. So I wanted to do more. And I guess I came upon metabolic therapies, so fasting, keto diets, and similar kinds of strategies as a potential way to do that. So I was inspired. And then I decided I needed to go to a new country where nobody knew me because, you know, you need to redefine yourself. And it's nice to go somewhere where nobody knows you so that you can sort of redefine yourself in a fresh manner. So I chose New Zealand because it looked beautiful and I'd been there before and I really enjoyed the people and the countryside and the land. And it's a super place for riding motorcycles, which I just love. So here I am, and yeah, started diving into research as soon as I arrived, and 9 years later, almost, I'm still here.
Yeah, great. So what is it about ketogenic diets, carbohydrate restriction that is so beneficial to neurological conditions that you found?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess you can look at things from a why perspective and a how perspective. So why might they be beneficial is arguably more important, and they're evolutionary.
Mm.
So if you look at the best studies that look at sort of modern hunter-gatherers, and the hunter-gatherer period of our evolution was like 99% of our evolution as human beings, everything before agriculture, then I can link people with the best studies, which, well, the best in my opinion, but they quite clearly show that about perhaps 2/3 of all hunter-gatherer diets were low carb or ketogenic, and maybe another sort of 20% were low to moderate carb, and then there was just a handful that were sort of higher in carbohydrate content. This is all before agriculture, before farming, and all before culture, basically, right? So there's a lot of cultural diets, but they're not. They've only been around a few thousand years. They're not like our hunter-gatherer diets.
Mm.
And of course, a lot of those ketogenic and low-carb hunter-gatherer diets were carnivore-based. I have yet to find a hunter-gatherer population that did not eat meat. As you know, there were human beings that did live many thousands of years ago. I think Australopithecus is an example that were vegetarian more or less, and they died out.
Mm.
So, especially in the northern latitudes, the Mongols, native Inuit in Canada, where I'm from, and native Scandinavians, they were primarily meat-based. So, with very few carbohydrates. So that's evolutionary why, and then so we're adapted to that, and we can get into this if your viewers might be interested. But hunter-gatherers lived just as long as we do today if you
Mhm.
take out child mortality, infant mortality, and warfare. So they live just as long as the world's mean age population is today across the board. So
Mhm.
about 72, 73 years of age. So we can talk about that later if you want. But so because that's a common misconception. So
Yeah.
that's the why. It's sort of like an ancient thing, fasting, ketogenic diets, low carb diets that we're used to.
Mhm.
Then the how could it help neuron health? Well, then you can start talking about all the mechanisms that occur inside the body. So what happens, the most obvious thing is you get these production of ketones. And so if you're fasting, the ketones comes from your body fat. Your liver produces most of them, but most of your organs in your body can produce the ketones, like your brain and kidneys and so on to some extent. And then if you're eating a high fat keto diet, carnivore keto diet, whatever, then the fat you eat can also be converted into ketones. And um, basically, neurons and muscle love fatty acids and ketones as fuel sources. So they can use glucose, which is the main fuel source most people in the modern era use. But as hunter-gatherers, we would have been using ketones a lot when we were fasting, when we were eating our natural diet.
Mhm.
And so the ketones have mechanistic advantages for neurons in particular. They produce more energy for the amount of oxygen you breathe, yet they produce fewer free radicals, reactive oxygen species, which are okay in sort of small amounts, but at large amounts, they can be very damaging to cells and I think contribute to things like neurodegenerative disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and so on. So there's that. And then the ketones is just sort of the tip of the iceberg, really. There's all these other, I call it an orchestra of changes that occur, all these other changes that occur within the cells. And it all sort of converges on optimizing mitochondria biology, which is their mitochondria function, mitochondria activity, the way mitochondria move. Mitochondria, for the very few of your listeners, I'm sure, who don't know what they are these organelles, these little almost like organisms. There's a few hundred in most cells that move around the cells and they change their shape and they join together and divide. They can actually leave the cell and into the blood. They're called cell-free mitochondria and move around the body on their own. So um, really, I think where we go wrong with a lot of the lifestyle disorders, and by that I mean heart attacks and strokes, cancer, most cancers, most neurodegenerative disorders, so Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, Huntington's, and the metabolic syndrome, like type 2 diabetes and all the things associated with that. Where we go wrong there, in my perspective, is that it's fundamentally a problem of damage and disruption to mitochondria. So the ketogenic diet and fasting protocols and all those things are evolutionary strategies, are all aimed at improving mitochondrial health through so many different mechanisms that we could talk about. But I think what's important for your viewers, and I'm coming to the end here, is that by adopting an evolution-based strategy, stuff that our ancestors around the world, no matter what ethnicity one is, did for hundreds of thousands of years, is all about improving mitochondrial health and improving mitochondrial resilience. And if your mitochondria are healthy and resilient, then I think your chance of getting a lifestyle disorder, all the ones I mentioned, which are killing most of the people in the West today, is your chance of getting one is much, much lower. Not zero, but much, much lower. And my interest, my research, and we can bridge into this, is trying to use these strategies to improve people who already have those disorders, as opposed to just preventing the emergence of such a disorder. So that's my interest. I think these strategies, and I've concentrated on fasting keto diets, are evolutionarily normal and beneficial. The modern diet is not. The modern dietary lifestyle is not. And the mechanisms are, there's so many hundreds of mechanisms, I'd mentioned just a few, are very compelling for neuron health, but particularly the mitochondria that live inside the neurons. Because I think looking at things from a mitocentric point of view, it's all about health is more about our mitochondria than it is about our cells. If our mitochondria are healthy, our cells will also be healthy.
Absolutely. So yeah, thank you for that. And so as a result of this, you've started applying this to your patient population. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I've decided to, so remember all great ideas start out as heresy. So, as you've probably experienced yourself, I know you
Mhm.
have. So there's resistance, a lot of
Mhm.
resistance to this approach, right? Because in medicine, we often try to mask symptoms with medications and things, and it can make people better for a while, but it doesn't really get to the core of the disorder. Why did this person get this thing? So I'm implementing these things in certain populations of people to try and uh, heal them, try to restore their mitochondria to some extent. And I've decided to choose a lot of the toughest ones that I was so frustrated with when I was training in neurology. So Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, we've done two randomized controlled trials in those disorders. I've done some case study work in ALS and Huntington's.
Mhm.
And as you know, we've done a bit of work in glioblastoma, which is a terrible brain cancer. And we are currently we're over 3 years
Mhm.
into our current trial, which is going well so far. And yeah, those are the main things I've been working on. There's a few other things that I haven't mentioned, but sort of neurodegenerative disorders and cancer are the two things that I've decided to apply this to and see if we can help these people to have a better quality of life and to also have a longer life. So it's not just about lifespan, but it's about health span and lifespan, both.
Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia, Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass fed and finished pasture raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so that's interesting. So when in your trials with neurodegenerative diseases using ketosis and fasting, what did you find? What did you how did you apply that, and what were the results?
Yeah, okay. So first one we did was Parkinson's, and that was a randomized controlled trial, a parallel design. So we had 47 people. Half went on a low-fat, high-carb diet, and the other half went on a ketogenic diet. So this was just looking at a ketogenic diet and comparing it with a pretty strong sort of uh, comparator diet, the low-fat diet, because our low-fat diet had a lot of carbs, but there was no junk, ultra processed carbs in there. It was all high fiber vegetables, fruits. So someone who was and meat, of course, but someone who was a low fat proponent would look at it and go, that's pretty healthy.
Hmm.
And we compared that against the keto diet, which was, of course, very high fat, very low carb. It was an omnivore diet, so meat and vegetables both.
Hmm.
But and I got to admit, my nutrition specialist was a little irritated because she thought the comparator group was too strong. She thought the low-fat diet was too good to compare it against.
Hmm.
But anyways, keto. We just did that for 8 weeks, which at the time it was double what any other study had looked at in Parkinson's. The length of time. If I was to do it now, I'd do it a lot longer. But just in 8 weeks, the keto group, both groups improved, but the keto group improved more, quite a bit more.
Hmm.
So Parkinson's, for listeners that don't know, is mainly motor symptoms and non-motor. The motor symptoms are like the movement problems, the tremors, the rigidities, the stiffness, and the balance difficulties. But what usually dominates the quality of life and makes a person suffer more is the non-motor symptoms. So that's there's several categories, but it's things like sleep disorders, mood disorders, depression, anxiety, apathy, cognitive problems, kind of subtle, swallowing problems, bowel problems like constipation, bladder problems. There's so many. The non-motor symptoms improved by 10% in the low-fat diet, right? And that was pretty good. We got rid of all their ultra-processed carbs.
Hmm.
So good, and threw in a lot of fiber. But the keto group improved by 40%.
Yeah,
And this
well.
was an average. So this was an average of all the patients. If I took the best three patients, their non-motor symptoms got wiped out. And
Yeah.
then if I took the worst three patients, of course, they maybe didn't change much at all. But on average, it was 40%. So pretty powerful for just 8 weeks. And it was
Mhm.
notable because the medications we use for Parkinson's don't help a lot of the non-motor symptoms very much. The motor symptoms also improved in both groups by about 20 to 25%. I do think both diets were better than what the patients were on before.
Mm.
And also, there might have been a bit of a placebo effect involved in that as well. But so I got to say, though, in the last 4 weeks of the trial, the keto group was accelerating quite quickly. The keto group actually, uh, their motor symptoms, even their non-motor symptoms, didn't improve as much in the first 4 weeks. And I think that's normal because there's an adaptation phase
Mm.
where people are suddenly going from a high carb diet to a very low carb, high fat diet. And your body, your brain, your neurons, your heart, and your muscles need time to adjust.
Mm.
So that was Parkinson's. Alzheimer's, we did a randomized control trial, randomized crossover trial in that. So more powerful design. So it basically allows you to get a very strong signal as to whether your intervention, and in this case, a keto diet as well, has an effect because we only had 26 people in that, but it was very well powered, so more than enough people to find a strong signal. And the reason for that is because you put half of those 26 on a keto diet, and we put the other half on this time a standard of care diet. So dietitian recommended dietary changes that they implemented into their normal diet. And we did that for 12 weeks, and then we had a 10-week washout where everyone goes back to the normal diet to try and get rid of any effects, good or bad. And then 12 weeks where everyone flips and goes on the other diet. So everyone gets both diets. It's such a powerful design.
Mm.
Long story short, that one showed we looked at three main things. So cognition, function, quality of life, and cognition, they all improved. Cognition only improved trend, though, in a trend manner. It didn't get there statistically significantly. So you can only say it's encouraging, but you know, but function, daily function, which is arguably the most important thing to people with Alzheimer's, improved tremendously, and in a statistically meaningful manner, but also more importantly, a clinically meaningful manner. So a clinically meaningful means it matters to the patient. It's an obvious change. And a quality of life too, special quality of life scale for Alzheimer's improved in a statistically and clinically meaningful manner. So that was very important because Alzheimer's is a super tough one. We don't have any treatments any good for that. So those are the two main trials and those two that we did.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic, and it's really encouraging to see more of these studies being done because unfortunately you just hear a lot of clinicians just giving a blanket. Well, we just don't have study, we just don't have data,
Yeah.
and my question to them is always, have you looked?
Hmm.
Because actually there is, and
Yeah.
yeah, we don't get spoon fed it, as I mentioned earlier. We don't get taught this in medical school. We don't get taught this in residency, and we don't have a drug rep coming in or a keto rep coming in every Tuesday to buy us lunch and tell
Yeah.
us about all the studies on keto. But we do have that with the pharmaceutical companies, and so that's what we think. Wow, there's just no data on it. We just don't know. It's like, well, but have you looked? And so it's great to have more of these studies coming out because then you can just, oh, actually, no, there's some data right here, which is great. So, have you found that your colleagues in your neurology department have sort of come around to this way of thinking, seeing the trials that you've put on?
Yeah. So we're at a mid-sized hospital, just over 600 beds. It's the
Mhm.
fourth biggest in New Zealand, but it's New Zealand, it's a small country.
Yeah.
And so there's seven of us neurologists, uh, and then there's a couple of registrars and some junior doctors, and a lot of clinical nurse specialists, about five or six of them. So a couple of the other neurologists are really keen, very supportive,
Mhm.
highly supportive, and then the others are all sort of interested, but not quite ready to do it themselves.
Mm.
So the other two, very supportive, doing it themselves to some extent. And the juniors, a couple of the juniors are really super supportive
Mhm.
and doing it themselves. And it's mixed. It's mixed, but generally there's nobody against it in my department. Now, when I just presented at the so as you know, I presented a number of low carb conferences where
Mhm.
you and I get to catch up, but I also present. I really try to keep presenting at mainstream neurology conferences. So I just presented at our national New Zealand one last week, which I present at almost every year. And so I spoke about our recent paper about how to conceptualize Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and these other sorts as sort of metabolic icebergs with a lot of mitochondrial problems that you don't see. And, the reception was mixed again. A number of people came up to me afterwards and said, really great talk. That really was something I just don't understand because the whole conference was basically about genetics,
Right.
right? So the big rage in neurology is about genetics and trying to find gene therapies, which I'm not against, but it's only going to help a very small fraction of people. So, but there were, and it's usually the most sort of prestigious people at the conference. So it's older people who, are more versed. They've had more decades in this sort of traditional model that throw up the skeptical questions at the end. So yeah, there definitely was more negativity from just a small number of high status individuals. But uh, when most of their criticisms are, as you say, it's because they're not really aware of what's out there, and they don't really. A lot of the arguments aren't very powerfully presented, and I'm able to quite quickly process them and sort of, I don't know, shoot them down. Uh, Occasionally, I get a good argument. In that case, I try to incorporate it into my thinking so that I can improve for the next time on whatever that is. It's important to get that feedback. So there's some more negativity when I present outside of my department to colleagues in other cities and internationally as well.
Mhm.
But it's not too bad. I think most people are pretty open-minded. But at the end of the day, almost everyone is still glued and versed in this drug approach to trying to help people, and this sort of germ theory approach where you're trying to eliminate symptoms and attacking things rather than trying to restore people's health. And I guess it's just going to take a lot more time, I think, and we need more people to get the word out there, like yourself, but also we also need better studies to back it up. Because yeah, there are studies supporting this, like the two I just mentioned, but there's only a handful of studies in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's for these approaches, and I think in terms of randomized trials that you get to a very small number. So
Mm.
it'll take more time. We need better data, but I think it's happening.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
the good thing is that it's starting to put that sort of wedge in the door and start making people start thinking about this. And as more of these studies start coming out, that just paves the way for other people to say, okay, well, let's really put this to bed. Let's get 4,000 people and do this for a long-term study and just really hammer this home. Is there something here or not? And
yeah,
so, I think that's it all builds up to that sort of thing. And then of course, there's a point where any clinician says, is this a practice modifying evidence, and say, okay, well, maybe I'll try this. It's not going to hurt them,
yep,
just taking away carbohydrates, giving
yep,
them good nutrition, changing that, and then what happens as a result of that. And I mean, and that's why we do studies to see, hey, what's going to help my patients, what's going to help me. And so we take that information and we apply it, and we see, wow, actually, this really helps. And so that's all the really study you need as a clinician, because if you're getting improvement, marked improvement in these neurodegenerative diseases or other sorts of ailments, well, it doesn't matter what studies say. I mean, you're seeing the evidence in front of you. I mean, that goes back to Hippocrates, where he said, hey, don't just do things because we've always done them. Don't just pray to Apollo hoping something happens. Do things that work.
yeah.
Observe, try, test, experiment, and through trial and error, pick the things that work better. And so, it's great that people are starting to pick that up, which is great.
Yeah, I think there's a general awareness out there, and you can see it on social media, for example, where people are trying stuff themselves, and a lot of people are getting great results with fasting protocols, with keto diets, with carnivore keto diets, and
Mhm.
so on. And it's um, it's really good to see that. On the other hand, I think it's sort of can polarize, the common, a lot of people out there with the modern medical system, and it might make some of my colleagues dig their heels in more about, like in cancer, for example, is a good example where we're doing this glioblastoma trial. A lot of the oncologists, some are open-minded. In my hospital, they're very open-minded in general, but they've had to put up with me for a few years talking about it. But other places, I get emails from people around the world, as you do too, I'm sure, that where they're having a lot of difficulty with their oncologist and wherever they are, and the oncologist just flatly doesn't says eat what you want, it doesn't matter. And so this is a case where I guess you stick with what you know and you dig your heels in, and the more people come up to you talking interested in a keto diet for their cancer, or something, the more the oncologist might. Some people will just dig their heels in more and just say it's stupid, and then it gets difficult because things get polarized. But yeah, it's good to see that most people are sort of thinking outside the box. I think most, and if you're a patient, you have one of these disorders, you absolutely have to, because let's face it, the standard of care for many of the conditions that we're talking about here is not so good.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, yeah, you keep doing the same thing, you're going to keep getting the same results.
Yep.
And that's not what we want. We want different
Nope.
results, better
Yeah,
results.
that's right.
Um, so, we touched on the glioblastoma work, but that's something that's obviously very, very interesting to me as well. Can you tell us a bit about that? That's been going on for 3 years now, and there
Yeah.
are a handful of these studies, but this is one that's been going on probably longer than most of them at this point, and it'd be really interesting to hear how that's going
Yeah.
and what the results have been, if you
Yeah,
can talk about
sure.
it.
Yeah, I can tell you
Mhm.
I can tell you as much as I can.
Yeah.
I can't tell everything because of the hasn't been published yet. But so we're doing what is the most intensive metabolic therapy program I've ever applied to any group of people that I know of,
Mhm.
and we're applying it to glioblastoma. It's based on the theory. A lot of it comes from Dr. Thomas Seyfried's work, who I'm sure you've interviewed.
Mhm.
And the idea is that cancer is essentially a mitochondrial metabolic disorder, rather than a genetic disorder per se. It's a bit of both,
Mhm.
obviously, but the genetic stuff, a lot of it probably comes as a consequence of the mitochondrial defect. That's the theory. And so what we're trying to do, and when these cells become cancerous, they undergo this Warburg effect where they start to use glucose as a fuel source in a rampant manner. They become ravenous, as Sam Apple's book, a great book if you haven't read it, about the history of Warburg and cancer mentions. And at the same time, they can also use other things like glutamine, which is an amino acid. So they sort of change their metabolism and become a bit abnormal. And so they become sugar-loving cells, essentially. And the metabolic therapy, when you implement fasting and keto diet therapy, the idea is that it really makes life difficult for them. And there is a reason to believe it can also enhance the effect of the standard treatments, the chemo radiation, while protecting normal cells from those treatments, because they are pretty toxic to
Mhm.
cells across the board. And it's very tough for these people to go through chemo and radiation. I could tell you, and as you know, because you're with your neurosurgery background. So that's the idea. And deep down, I'm hoping that maybe we can restore their mitochondrial health. I believe in some patients we may be doing that. So the protocol is basically a 5-day fast every month, roughly, with a ketogenic diet in all other days. And it's a ketogenic diet with intermittent fasting. So one meal OMAD or TMAD, one meal a day or two meal a day. And I tell them when to eat one and when to eat two. It's quite a rigid protocol, and it's timed in a very particular manner with the chemo and radiation to try and maximize the damage of those treatments on the cancer cells while protecting normal cells.
Mhm.
And we do that for about 10 months because that's how long the standard treatment protocol lasts. And then after the 10 months, I sit everyone down with everyone and say, what do you want to do now? Do you want to go back to your normal diet? Not one person has done
Mhm.
that. Yeah, not one. And then but then I say, well, we can modify things now. You've done this program that I have. It's it's largely an omnivore-based keto diet, which you can divert into carnivore or vegetarian keto options. And I sit down with people and say, "What do you want to do?" And then people often they want to do a version of what we've been doing, so they want to add in some extra recipes that they're more familiar with, usually based on ethnicity. So, we have a Maori couple that decided to do a Maori style ketogenic diet.
Hmm.
And we have a South African couple who are veering off into a South African style ketogenic diet. We have a couple people who want to do carnivore, no problem. So we put them on, get a carnivore diet. And it's usually the younger guys who,
Hmm.
they just want to eat the meat and eggs and butter and make it real easy.
Hmm.
And that's really great because you could just, no carbs coming in. So that's very effective and simple. And then Mediterranean keto is a pretty popular one as well. So there's different ways to do this after they finish the formal protocol, and then we just carry it out and see what happens. I see them every 2 months, measure their quality of life and their ketones and their glucose ketone index. For people that don't know, that's a ratio of the glucose and ketone level in the blood. You want the glucose down and the ketone high. And of course, I'm looking at their survival time because that's what matters to people. They want to live longer and better with these terrible tumors. So that study is ongoing. The first patient we enrolled is about 38 months now, so
Oh,
just over
wow.
the 3 year mark. And it's been very difficult to apply at times because of a lot of it's the friction with the standard of care approach. I've got to be honest. Just when things get bumpy, a lot of my colleagues tend to blame the metabolic therapy
Hmm.
when it's not the metabolic therapy, it's something else. But then it takes a while to sort of help them through that process. And all the meantime, you're trying to help the patients through the process too. So, but I can say that the study is basically looking at feasibility. Can they do it? Safety, is it safe? And check. So they've had a very low GKI for a very long time. And it's nobody's. They embrace the dietary change in general. The 5 day fast is variable. Some people like them totally fine. Some people are less keen on them, which understandable. And then, we're looking at safety. So there's been no serious adverse effects from the metabolic therapy at all. Nothing serious. It's all been there have been occasional serious side effects requiring hospital admission, but have all been ascribed to the standard treatments in general. And then we are looking at the quality of life measures, those and the how long they live. And all I can say is things look encouraging on both counts, but I can't give numbers because
Yeah.
that would probably be a little irresponsible because,
Hmm.
glioblastoma, as good as things are going, things could change in 2 months with GBM. It can change quite quickly. It's quite a capricious thing. So I don't want to to get ahead of the data.
Hmm.
That's a mistake. But look, at this point, I honestly can't see it getting published before 2026.
Okay.
And that's a good thing. So the
Yeah.
longer people are living, the longer it's going to take,
Yeah.
and we're just going to keep going. And I think it has the potential to really it's already a success in terms of the feasibility safety data, which has never been done in this extreme a protocol. It's extreme to a modern dietary lifestyle perspective, but it's a protocol. In all honesty, I basically have done for a long time myself, and
Hmm.
it's not extreme once you live it. Like eating one meal a day keto, as you know yourself, it's normal. But what I hope the study, if it keeps going as it is, will show something very powerful on all those measures and make people think a little bit more about what the best way to manage glioblastoma is.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
And um, so is this as I understand, this is just this cohort. Are you comparing this to historical averages, or do you have
Good
another
question.
control
Yeah.
group?
So it was difficult to start a randomized trial in this one for many reasons. Um, One, though, was ethically, it would be hard to have a patient diagnosed with a glioblastoma. I just felt it would be very difficult, and I enrolled them in the trial and randomized them to a normal diet versus the keto, the protocol, and then tell them, sorry, you get the normal. These are people's lives.
Yeah.
And I know the whole point of the trial is to see if it helps them live longer. So of course but still, I think it would have been difficult. So we went with a single group, and two things. We have sort of a control group who's all the people that were eligible fully for the trial, but were not offered it for one reason or another.
Hmm.
So we've got that data. And then there's the thing that, like, I guess if they live a few extra months, like 2, 3, 4 extra months, the people on the metabolic program, I wouldn't be too excited about that. But if it's this thing called the parachute effect, where you don't need to do a randomized control trial to know that if you jump out of a plane with a parachute, it's probably going to help you live longer, right?
Yeah.
So I'm relying on the parachute effect. The difference, I would only be excited if the difference was uh, so profound that it would make even a hardened skeptic go take a second look at it and go, what happened there?
Yeah.
So those are the things. So we sort of have a control group, but it's not a proper control group. It's a non-randomized
Hmm.
control group, receive standard of care and everything.
Hmm.
But I'm relying on, I guess my hope is that we find a difference. We just have to wait and see how it goes.
Yeah.
We find a parachute effect in the results. And, even if we don't, it's still going to make people think. But if we
Yeah.
do, it'll make them think a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose too, I mean, there's going to be some people, I assume everybody is obviously offered standard of care. Most of them would have accepted that, but then some,
Everyone.
yeah, yeah, perfect. And so, but then do you have anyone who has had a tumor in a location like a brainstem or somewhere else, but really able to get a biopsy and really weren't able to get like a full
Uh,
95% plus resection, and see how they're doing?
yeah, we've had tumors in difficult places, the
Mm.
thalamus, the brainstem, and so on. But we have few inclusion criteria for the trial, but one of them, we have to have biopsy proven glioblastoma. And we're only looking at the IDH wild type, which is about
Mm.
90% of them. So we're not looking at the IDH mutants, which are now
Okay.
called, used to be called glioblastoma, but now they're called grade 4 astrocytomas. So
Mhm.
that's some like Pablo Kelly, who many of
Mhm.
you viewers might know. He had a grade 4 astrocytoma, did extremely well
Mhm.
with his approach, but we would have he couldn't have entered the trial because we're only
Mhm.
looking at the glioblastomas, the pure ones, and those are the worst. They have the worst
Yeah.
prognosis, much worse than worse than the grade 4 astrocytomas. So without a biopsy, it would be difficult. We've had a couple of patients in the last 3 years who might have who were not eligible for a biopsy, and unfortunately, I'm not able to offer it because we have to be sure
Yeah.
that it's GBM and not something else.
Yeah. Are there ones that you were able to get a biopsy but not a full resection that are in the
Oh,
group?
yep, four
Yeah.
or five of those.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
Because those ones will, I mean, you'll start seeing that disparity earlier, presumably, because I mean these averages change, they get re-updated, but without surgery, and just chemo radiation, I mean you're thinking looking like 9, 10 months, as an
Yeah,
average.
exactly. Exactly. It's really tough. And we've had people who are, they have multiple tumors at
Right.
diagnosis, which is not common for GBM, but it can happen. There's two or
Mm.
three of those, multiple tumors.
Mm.
So, those are tough too.
Mm.
Yeah, so, it's been a really a big learning experience for me because the neurosurgeons, you guys see a lot more of these brain cancers than neurologists do.
Mm.
Typically, I'm probably the only neurologist that I'm pretty sure I am in this
Mm.
country that has any significant input to patients with GBM now because of this trial, and I've learned a lot. So, yeah, but anyways, we're accepting anyone who has proper GBM,
Mm.
who basically accepts the standard of care, which is almost everyone, but not quite everyone. And yeah, then we're good. And
Yeah.
they have
Yeah.
to live with, they have to be treated at our center. So
Yeah.
I've had a few people contact me from different cities and so on, but unfortunately I couldn't enroll them because we want all the standard treatments to be done by the same people to keep the consistency.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Helps answer the question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And is that Is that possible for people to sort of move in, and get treatment at your facility, or would they have to relocate, or is that not
They
really
would, yeah, they
feasible in the public system?
it's pretty tough. It is
Mhm.
physically possible. Like the logistics is there. There's a cancer center near the hospital where people can live for a few weeks while
Yeah.
they do this. But it's just that in New Zealand the medical system is quite oh, it's got fewer resources than
Mhm.
the Australian system or
Mm.
other systems in general. Actually, many other systems, and so there would be it would be really hard to get someone to be treated here because we're already at maximum overload with our
Mm.
oncology ability to just administer the standard treatments. I could enroll
Right.
lots, but it's there are pressures on the system that unfortunately preclude that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna see if we wanted to do a call out, people in New Zealand that had a GBM wild type sort of thing, if they
Yeah.
still accepting sort of patients, but that might not be possible.
Yeah. Well, we're fully recruited now, so
Oh,
can't
great.
enter this. Yeah, we're fully recruited, so I'm just
Yeah.
following people now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Actually, when we caught up in Switzerland there in June, I
Mhm.
can't remember, was it June?
I think it's June.
We
Yeah.
had, yeah, we were fully recruited by, you know, August or so, like very quickly
Yeah,
after
right.
that. So
Yeah.
since then, I've just been following people. Yeah, it's been good because recruitment was pretty challenging too.
Yeah.
But yeah, for future studies, it would be great to try and figure out those kinds of things
Hmm.
because there's so many. I know there were so many people that wanted to enter the trial that just didn't live in our Waikato Bay of Plenty and Lakes region that
Hmm.
were just not eligible because their oncologists at their city were not, they were not part of the trial. So I couldn't. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well, I guess the good thing is that, this is something that if it's not like they need a prescription or, they need guidance, but if it's something that if they wanted to do that on their own outside of the trial, that's something that they can do, which is nice as well.
Yeah, and there have been a few of those. It's just difficult because, like, like I said, for you and myself, it's pretty normal, like if to
Hmm.
do a 1 meal a day keto strategy. But for many people, and the people getting the GBM, many are in the older generation that they grew up in the low fat era where fat is bad, saturated fat's really bad, and you don't want too much salt. And of course, you need salt and saturated fat and all this stuff when you do these things. They're
Hmm.
your allies. Making that mind flip, that psychological flip, is very difficult for some people, and I find the guidance is really crucial to get them through not just the keto diet, but also the 5 day fasts in particular.
Hmm.
Like so, I the first 5 day fast, I'm emailing them daily, and I give them a couple of phone calls and see them if necessary. Just make sure everything's going okay. And it goes by fine as long as you're on top of things, but things can get out of control quickly if people just don't realize how much salt they need to have on a fast or something very simple to fix. So I guess people who trying it on their own outside of the protocol, it's I think it would be quite a bit harder.
Hmm.
It's not that the protocol's that hard, it's that not having a guide to show you where to go and what to do makes it hard
Hmm.
because very few people really understand what it's all about. So I think, that's the thing that a crucial role, and I've seen that with my own patients here. Like the guidance is super critical, certainly in the
Hmm.
first few weeks and months. After 6 months or so, most people are pretty good. They don't really need me anymore, and I can almost delete myself. I've made myself, um, what is it, sort of almost
Obsolete.
obsolete.
Yeah.
Not quite, but almost. And I think that is actually a very good thing. That really is the goal, isn't it? To try and get
Yeah.
people's health to a point where they know what to do and they don't need you anymore.
Hmm.
Whereas I guess the current system doesn't always work that way.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's about the return customer, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
what was the saying? A patient cured is a customer lost. So yeah, can't
Mm.
have that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I tell my patients that in my metabolic health practice. Say like, look, I'm trying to get you into a position that you have the life skills and resources that you don't need me and you don't need to come back and you don't need
Fantastic.
self-establishment unless there's actually some sort of emergency. And so that's my business model. My business model is to not be in business, but the thing is like it's never going to not happen. There's so many sick people out there.
Yeah,
I think that hopefully long term we get all this information out there and this becomes more mainstream and accepted and people start applying this in their own lives and raising their children like this. We're going to see a lot less of this chronic disease like we did historically. And at that point, then we're going to go back to doing real medicine where you have these accidents, emergencies, these critical care sort of issues, these acute care sort of issues, the things that we were dealing with as doctors 100 years ago, 150 years ago, that your body isn't going to be able to fight off necessarily. And
yep,
and so that's also something that I like to look into. That's why I started getting interested in the trauma side of neurosurgery. And the accidents and emergencies, people are always going to be falling off ladders. They're always going to
definitely.
get into accidents and have emergencies that break their back and their spine or have some sort of peripheral nerve injury that you have to fix. So that sort of thing, it would be nice that if in the lifespan of my career I could then go to basically doing that full time. That's might be a pipe dream, but it is my dream and hope that one day
Well,
that's just all I'll be doing.
I think it's a good dream, and like if you look at the two main causes of death of hunter-gatherer times were infections and warfare.
Yeah.
So warfare, trauma.
Hmm.
So infections, that's one thing modern medicine is really good at. Acute infections, we're really
Hmm.
good at treating that with our antibiotics and so on. And a lot of the trauma warfare related stuff, we have
Yeah.
laws that prevent a lot of it, but also we're really good at kneading bones together and fixing joints and things. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's it. And those guys, those hunter-gatherers, really didn't die from lifestyle disorders. Very rare.
Yeah.
So if we can get back to a point where we can just keep those lifestyle disorders right down, what a wonderful vision for the future. I mean, it's just that, people, not just health span, but lifespan would be increased, well beyond what it is now. I think the human
Mhm.
potential is more than is realized. And yeah, then you could return to being a trauma doc. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was what I was taught in genetics in my undergraduate class 24 years ago at University of Washington. Was that genetically based on the length of our telomeres, we were already designed to live 120 years on average, And so what I was told then it was right now the first person to live past 120 years has probably been born right now, and we'll see when they show up. But obviously, with all our modern advancements, we should be fine. It was always the traumas and the issues before, and just this lack of modern medicine was the only thing there. But
Mm,
genetically we should make it. But like you say, that's not what people were dying from or dying from now in the hunter-gatherer population. I saw a paper written by an anthropologist um, at Arizona State University that did years and probably decades of work with an Amazonian tribe and studied them long term. And he said that exact same thing, that if you discount infant mortality rates, these people were living into their 70s and 80s,
yep.
as an average, right? And so,
Yep.
and if they,
The
if they were,
modal age of death, the most common age of death was
yeah,
72 in these people.
yeah,
And the current
exactly.
population, current world average age of death is 73.
Yeah, there you go. And like you said, this is a well-established, you know, fact in anthropology that these hunter-gatherer populations are alive right now and historically and prehistorically, they did not die from the chronic diseases. They died from, infections and,
Correct.
and traumas, basically.
Yep.
And but then when they transition into a post-agricultural society, then that changes. Then the main issues that they get are all these non-communicable chronic diseases, the diabetes, heart disease, cancers, autoimmunities, et cetera, neurodegenerative diseases. And it changes, and that becomes the most common issue, which is interesting because the life expectancy doesn't change. So it's not
Exactly.
just
So,
they're, yeah, living longer or something.
yeah, so if you take like the three Achilles heels of the hunter-gatherers were infant mortality, death
Mhm.
during childhood, and then infections and homicide, warfare. And modern medicine is really good at treating all three.
Mhm.
We've got infant mortality very low. We can treat the acute infections very well. And trauma, warfare, we have laws and things that keep that down. So it's awesome. We could have really take the hunter-gatherer lifestyle and then amplify it with modern what we can offer for modern medicine, get rid of the lifestyle disorders. And I don't know, it's almost the sky's the limit with
Mhm.
what humans could do in terms of longevity and health. I wouldn't even hazard a guess how long we could live on
Mhm.
average, but it's certainly not 73.
Yeah.
And it's not even, in the 80s, which is a lot of the Western countries. So
Yeah.
it's beyond that too. And so yeah, anyways.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if you're dying of complications of diabetes, that means that you've been sick for like 40 years and finally your
Yes.
body's just given up. Okay, well, what if you just remove that and your body's just allowed to continue on? It's not just degrading as the years and decades go on. Like, of course you're going to live longer. You're going to live a lot longer and a lot healthier.
Hmm.
And it's going to be like we see animals in the zoo where they're just this healthy, active adult and not that active because they're in a box,
Yeah.
sort of live there. So it's not like they're getting exercise even.
Yep.
And then they're sort of doing their things, going around, entertaining people, being bored, eating food. And then one day they just sort of start slowing down. Another day they're slowing down a little more and they sort of go into a corner and they just sort of sleeping all day and then they don't wake up. And that's pretty much it. They're very healthy, could be active adults if they weren't in a box. And then one day it's just like, whoop, that's just sort of come to the end of the tether, and just that's it, and they just sort of peacefully drift off. That's I read descriptions, like Dr. J.H. Salisbury came with a Salisbury steak and was doing this in the 1800s. He described a very similar pattern in the Native Americans. I don't know if it was the Cheyenne, but anyway, the people in the Great Plains that predominantly subsisted on the American buffalo bison. And he was saying there was a couple, they were 115 and 110 years old. And the man who was just spry and active, he's running around, he's getting very panicked because his wife of, nearly a century was starting to sort of slowly drift away. And he was panicked. He's like, oh my God, she's gonna die. But she wasn't sick. She wasn't having a problem. It was just she was just slowing down and slowing down and slowing down. And so he's running around trying to do all these sorts of things. And Salisbury described him as a very spry and physically active 115-year-old, and
Interesting.
yeah, and then the wife sort of slipped away and passed away peacefully, like we see in animals in captivity.
Mm.
And so we see that. I mean, there's you have to take it with a grain of salt. We don't know. We don't have a birth certificate on these people.
Yeah.
Half the birth certificates from random countries. I don't know if you can trust them. I mean, there's that whole scandal even in
The blue
uh,
zones.
well, the blue zones definitely.
Yep.
Yeah, and if you take the blue zones at face value, then why aren't you taking the Native Americans at face value?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's good to be skeptical and even, especially your own work. So
Yeah.
it's harsh, but yeah, maintaining a critical, skeptical eye is really important. And finding the balance is important too. Like you don't want to be overly skeptical. You want to
Hmm.
be open-minded, but you
Yeah.
don't want to embrace every new idea that comes along without some kind of
Yeah.
um self-reflection and criticism, constructive criticism of the
Mhm.
idea or what's presented to you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I found other stuff, other things as well. And there was a guy named Chief John Smith White Wolf, and you'll look at blogs and people, oh, this couldn't possibly be as old as he said he was. But these are people's opinions. These are blogs, and
Yeah.
so,
Yep.
that we don't have hard evidence one way or the other. But we have his account and his children's account and their records. And he died in the 1920s. He said that he was 137. His family said he was 137. He was the chief of this people, and so people say, well, that's an insane amount of time. It's like like Bible story of Methuselah or something like that. But again, if we're working on 120, 130-year average genetically, it's not all that far fetched. It's very long lived, even for that. But at least you're in the ballpark. But then he has accounts of multiple accounts of describing his experience fighting as an adult in the War of 1812, right? So he dies in 1920s,
Mm.
and he at least says he was in the War of 1812. Maybe he was telling his uncle's stories and just said they were his. These are the sort of the claims that people make. But it's interesting anyway, and it sort of raises that question mark. And then you go back further to Herodotus, and I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but there's a historical account from Herodotus, the father of historians, looking at the interaction between the Persian Empire and Ethiopian kingdom. Persia had just taken over Egypt, and they were sort of eyeballing their new neighbors and potential adversaries in Ethiopia. And the diplomat from Persia was speaking with the king, and so Herodotus chronicled that interaction. And the king of Ethiopia asked the Persians, said, "Hey, what does your emperor eat? How long do your people normally live?" And it's 2,500 years ago or so. And the Persians said, described growing wheat and making bread, and said our people would normally live about 70 years. And the Ethiopian king said, "Well, no wonder you live such short lives if all you eat is dirt.
Yeah.
Our people only eat boiled meat and only drink the milk of our cattle besides
Yeah.
water,
Yeah.
and we would live 120 years, sometimes much longer." And there's that number again, 120. And
Yeah.
so you have the Salisbury talking about people living to be 110, 115 as
Yeah.
active, healthy adults. And Herodotus and other accounts, and the native Australian Aboriginals, the Nanette, the Inuit, they commonly, seeing these people, there's like they're out there, Nanette, herding caribou, and they're like, yeah, I'm 99. They're like, couldn't possibly be, but it's just dismissed out of hand, even though we're seeing again and again in different continents and different cultures and that have no internet, they're not talking to each other, but they're consistently saying the same thing, that they're living to a much older age with much more health as a result of that. And I think that requires at least some sort of introspection on this whole idea.
100%. I mean, good to be skeptical, and I would be wanting to verify it somehow a bit
Mm,
more, these ages. But 120 seems like a pretty reasonable mean age for humans who are metabolically healthy, truly
yeah.
metabolically healthy, which is a very rare thing, as you know.
Hmm.
And yet, if they have trauma or anything like that, they can get that fixed with modern medicine. I'd be open to that possibility.
Hmm.
I mean, I remember type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a great example. Like when I came out of training, even in 2000, into 2012, and I'd always been taught, as you have probably been taught, that type 2 diabetes is a chronic disease. And
Hmm.
it just slowly worsens, and you keep trying to manage it, usually by increasing insulin slowly, which is the exact opposite of what you should do, right? But this is what I was taught. And then when I first came across, I think it might have been Jason Fung's work where, he claimed that he was able to reverse.
I think we may have some connection issues. See if that comes back. We'll just give it a moment. Okay, it had a bit of technical issues, but we are back.
Yeah. So I was just saying type 2 diabetes is a great example. So like when I finished training, about 10 years ago now, that I learned that type 2 diabetes was a chronic, relentless disorder. And, you had to keep increasing insulin every year and treat it with drugs. And, that's probably in some ways the opposite of what you should do to improve this disorder. And it was, I think, Jason Fung's work that made me think about the possibility of actually putting it into remission and reversing it. And he seemed to be able to do that with most cases. At least he claimed to in his book, The Obesity Code. So I was skeptical, but I
Mm,
guess I was interested enough to actually go and spend a week at Jason's clinic in Toronto and verify this. So I was able
mm,
to speak to dozens of patients and see their lab work. And of course, speak to Jason himself and Megan Ramos, who was working with him at the time. And it was it was verifiable. And I saw that, these people were truly putting their diabetes into remission and coming off the medications. And I thought to myself, that was just mind blowing to me. It's so obvious to me now. Like
mm,
diabetes is quite straightforward to reverse in most cases, but at the time it was mind blowing.
mm,
And so if I had just been overly skeptical, I guess I would have never gotten that plane and gone to see him. And I probably would, maybe I'd still be thinking it's a chronic disease that you never get off your meds. But I guess embracing it without digging a little further is
Yeah.
important too. And I think that's how you find the truth. You be critical and but keep looking.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and that's it. You keep asking questions, you keep probing, and you keep, trying new things, and if you see like, okay, well, this makes sense, it's safe, it's not going to hurt anybody. First, do no
Hmm.
harm,
Yep.
and then you see for yourself. Like, well, and it's just the same as if you had, a major study that said, hey, we should use this drug. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, well, what happens when I try it? Everyone's getting worse. Guess what? Not using that drug anymore just because some study said so. If I'm
Yeah.
seeing, direct harm as a result of that and worse outcomes, because obviously there might be something wrong with the study, or maybe it just doesn't apply to my patients for one reason or another, or that patient for one reason or another. So you have to be critical about that. And but the reverse is true. If you see
Hmm.
something that is out of the scope of the mainstream, but you're seeing direct evidence that it makes sense from a mechanistic point of view, biological point of view, evolutionary point of view. It does not cause harm, and there is evidence that this works. Why the hell not give it a try and then see what happens? And if that's getting a better result than your standard practice that you're doing right now, what I don't see the problem with that. And I guess some people are just maybe a bit worried about branching out. They want to sort of protect themselves. If they sort of hide within the guidelines, then at least they're protected. But
Yeah, there's always sorry to interrupt.
no,
Keep
you're fine.
going.
There you go.
Okay, there's always a risk when you depart the mainstream. It's like
Mhm.
if you're in the mainstream and you're doing what everyone else does,
Yeah.
even if things go south and they go badly, you're okay from everyone else's perspective because you did the standard of care, even though it didn't work out.
Yeah.
But you didn't help the patient.
Yeah.
So, whereas if you go off the beaten track and you try something new, I have found that if it doesn't work out, you can get probably get even more heat on you.
Hmm.
And if it does work out, it can be brushed off as lucky,
Hmm.
or maybe it was something else that caused it rather than the intervention or whatever it was you did. So it's always a risk to go off the beaten track and try these things. But for the patients, um, it's really a no-brainer to have a certain path that goes to is associated with a prognosis that's not that great versus a more unknown path, but a potentially much greater outcome. I think you're going to take the second path most of the time. Unfortunately, people are also susceptible to pressure from the doctors, from family members, and so on. And there's a lot of people that don't understand the fasting, ketogenic diet, carnivore diet protocols and what they're about. And a lot of people even think that they're unhealthy. That pressure can unfortunately veer a lot of people into just sticking with what the known path. So yeah, it's difficult when you for both the person trying to help the patient and also the patient themselves to come off the beaten path, I guess, even though they should at certain times when they should.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and or they could just, dismiss it as, oh, it's just anecdotal, just anecdotal. It's like, well, I've got 500
Yeah.
patients that, yeah, it's 500 anecdotes. It's like, I'm going to work on this study that it's a cohort study of 13 patients, that we followed for 5 days, and that's real evidence. But yeah, I understand the impulse to sort of, protect yourself, but at the end of the day, it is CYA medicine. It's just cover your ass medicine, and it's not necessarily the best thing that you can do for your patients. And I have heard people say, I mean, there's this idea of it's evidence-based medicine. It's like, well, look, this is what the evidence shows. And I've actually legitimately heard doctors say, well, I don't practice evidence-based medicine. I practice guideline-based medicine. And if it's not in the guidelines, I'm not gonna veer from the guidelines. It's like, well, the guidelines are 10, 15 years behind the evidence, typically. And the evidence is typically 2 to 3 years behind the cutting edge, because those are the papers that are being published by people like yourself who've had an insight and say, hey, why don't I apply this to GBM patients and see what happens? We already have enough evidence to show that this is safe and at least effective in animal models and smaller studies and case series. So why don't we try this in a real study? That's the cutting edge. That's trying something new to try to find a better treatment. And that doesn't get published for several years. So evidence-based medicine is years behind what people are actually doing to try to push the forefront of our understanding. And then guideline-based medicines are a freaking light year behind that. So if you're practicing guideline-based medicine, it's a bit concerning to me. If you're a new doctor and you're just starting out and you don't know as much as you could in your specific field, sure, stay in the guidelines. That's
Yep.
your safe path. Those are your training wheels. But you don't want to be working with training wheels. Eventually you want to get the training wheels off and you want to be doing backflips on a BMX. I mean that's what we're trying to do here. So, the guidelines are safe and help you get going, but then they need to come off. And it is a bit concerning. You do risk things, and if things go wrong, then you pay the price for it. Or if things go perfectly right but you piss off enough people, you're also going to be in trouble. I had my dad actually got one of the first arthroscopic knee operations in America. His surgeon was the first guy that brought this surgical practice to America. He studied with this Japanese group um, who innovated it. Before that, they had the arthroscope, but what surgeons would do is they stick the scopes in, they'd look around, they talk about the anatomy, they take a bunch of notes, and then they just open the whole thing up and compare what they saw with the scope with what they saw when it was open. Not really helping, and we're paying for them to sort of tool around in our knee. Um, the Japanese actually started using the scopes as a surgical interventions. He went and studied with them for 6 months, brought it back to the U.S., but it was not covered. I mean, and he said to my dad, this is getting much better outcomes for people. And so he's like, I have to do it, but I'm flying without a parachute. No insurance, no malpractice insurance will cover me for these sorts of surgeries at all. So, all there has to be is just one little old lady to say, "Ooh, I've got my knee is sore and I'm done. My
Mm.
livelihood is gone." But, he was able to pay that way, that is the practice. I mean, no one does an open meniscus repair anymore. Like it's just like, or
Yeah.
it's just not that's not what happens. But so you have to sort of, um, for the sake of your patients and also for posterity, you sort of have to take, um, I guess risk is probably the wrong word, but it is a risk. But put yourself out there and be vulnerable to do the right thing, to do something that you feel is the best thing for your patient and to get demonstrable results that you can then share with your colleagues to hopefully change practice. But during that
That
initial phase,
requires that
you're a bit,
requires something that's very rare nowadays.
yeah,
It's called courage.
yeah, is that,
Yeah, it's much easier to just follow the guidelines, obviously, but you're absolutely right, Anthony. I mean, for junior doctors and people who don't know a topic well, that's what the guidelines are for. But for
yeah,
people who have been doing this for a long time, the so-called experts, or someone who's deals with a certain condition all the time, the moral imperative really is to push past the guidelines and try to improve things, especially if the outcomes aren't great with what your guidelines give you.
hmm
The moral imperative really is to try and make things better. And if you're not doing that, if you're just sticking to the guidelines, you're not only not being courageous,
hmm
you're not helping the patient, which is morally questionable.
mm,
And so, yeah, you're right. You should be taking those risks. Don't need to go crazy, but
yeah,
there's a lot of data backing up the
yeah,
safety, as you say, the safety feasibility of these kinds of approaches. And so, you want to push, you definitely want to push things and not just stick to the guidelines.
yeah, definitely. Well, to that end, you also mentioned that you had some case reports on things like ALS and Huntington's, which is heretofore like there is no treatment that will never
Mm,
get better. Huntington's, that is considered one of these things that is 100% genetic. You get this gene and you will have this disease. It will present at some time in your life, and
yeah,
it is invariably fatal and will go in one direction and one direction only.
yeah.
What has your experience been with these sorts of very serious illnesses? Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys.
So there's only been one person with ALS published who went on a fasting ketogenic diet protocol. We published that early this year. And only one person with Huntington's who's done this, who's been published. We published that a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
There is some good animal data in animal models of both conditions. But, at the end of the day, you have to look at interventional studies involving humans. So with the ALS fellow, basically, this guy was declining over 18 months. It can take a long time to diagnose ALS. It's not the easiest thing, but you get a lot of and uh, basically he had sort of the worst form of it, which is the bulbar onset form. So it starts with his swallowing, speaking, and breathing. And he was
Mhm.
declining. He had about, I just can't remember, 7 or 8 kilograms of weight loss. It's in the paper during that
Mhm.
18 months, and he was declining. So they were sort of desperate. And by the time he got diagnosed, and then, a few more months later, they were wanting to try something else because the only treatment we have for ALS really is a drug called Riluzole, which doesn't do a heck of a lot.
Mhm.
So they knew about our work and they wanted to try a metabolic therapy program, ketogenic metabolic therapy. So I said, okay, for ALS, let's try a 2 meal a day ketogenic diet. So that's TMAD, 2 meals a day. So it's a sort of a moderate form of daily fasting, no snacks between the 2 meals. It's nice because it's flexible. You can choose the timing of meals, and it was a keto diet.
Mhm.
And we did that for 18 months. And we measured him every 6 months, baseline in every 6 months. I had a, neuropsychologist and neurologist, not myself. I was not involved in the assessments, just arranging everyone to get together, assess him. And they didn't know what he was doing, you know, as well. So they were blinded. Uh, and then blood tests and so on. And we had respiratory function measures from our respiratory techs and so on. And basically, long story short, over 18 months, his function, which is the main thing with ALS, it really hammers your function. And there's this scale called the ALS FRS rating scale, which is sort of the gold standard way to monitor ALS. It usually declines every month um, by a certain amount. And he actually slightly improved by the end of the 18 months. So he was supposed to have
Okay.
declined by a tremendous amount by
Mm.
the end of the 18 months, and he improved. Not much,
Wow.
but he did. And that was actually a pretty major change of trajectory.
Yeah.
And his breathing parameters, notably his forced vital capacities, every 6 months kept getting better.
Wow.
Yeah, it was those are supposed to decline. That's a reasonably robust measure of lung function. And the way people with ALS usually die is because they die from poor lung function and they get a pneumonia and they can't clear it, so they
Mm.
pass away. But his got better every 6 months, and it was a trend. His weight, he only lost like sort of 2 to 3 kilograms of weight. So his weight loss, despite the fact that he's on a fasting protocol,
Mhm.
was mitigated. Now, if you subscribe to the calories in, calorie out theory, which has some validity to it, but it's not the whole story at all, then that doesn't make any logical sense. But of course, it's not just about calories in, calories out. There's
Mhm.
more to it than that. And I believe that he basically made his metabolism more efficient because in ALS, the metabolism is not efficient. You lose a lot of the calorie energy through heat processes and other things. And I speculate that he tightened all that up. So he was despite taking in fewer calories, more nutrient-dense meals, but still fewer calories overall, he was actually making his metabolism may have reset, so he was losing less energy and hence less weight loss. Anyways, I mean, it's an N of one. You have to be skeptical, as we were just saying, but the results that the papers out there, you can read it for yourself. The results were very encouraging to say the least. And I just spoke to his wife a couple of weeks ago, and he's still doing pretty
Oh,
good.
oh,
Yeah,
wow.
he's gone off the protocol to, by about 50%. So
Mm,
he's slowly declining again, but
mm,
very slowly.
mm,
And he's sort of at 5 years or something post-diagnosis now, which is pretty good.
yeah.
The Huntington's fellow, so Huntington's is okay, so ALS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS are 90% sporadic, 10% genetic. So in 10% of cases, there is a gene problem that's directly related to the onset of the condition. And these people usually get the disorder at a younger age. But 90% of these conditions are sporadic. We don't have any such genetic marker. And in those cases, probably a combination of lifestyle factors that are somehow causing the disorder. Now, Huntington's, in every case, pretty much every case, there's a known gene defect. It's called the Huntington gene, and it makes this Huntington protein. Now, everyone has a Huntington gene and a Huntington protein. It's actually a crucial gene with a crucial protein that's involved in many aspects of metabolism, and particularly mitochondrial metabolism throughout the
Mm,
body. So everyone's got it. The problem with Huntington's people is they get this sort of CAG repeat, a whole bunch of sort of mutations in the Huntington gene, which cause a sort of defective protein. And if you get sort of 40 or more of these repeats, you're going to get Huntington's. The more repeats you get, the sooner you're going to get it. It times pretty well. So that's why people say if you've got the Huntington gene, you're going to get Huntington's. That is true from our current level of knowledge.
mm,
But there are studies out there, twin studies, for example, that show
mm,
twins with the same number of CAG repeats, the same exact gene, and a pretty similar environment, but maybe a little different, can get Huntington's years apart, the
mm,
onset of it, and it takes a different form. So
mm,
if it's purely a genetic disease, that does not make sense, right? So it makes you wonder what else is going on. We also know that exercise and dietary lifestyle, probably these are correlation studies, but they are suggestive that exercise and diet may alter the timing of when Huntington's comes on. So, for example, with diet, high dairy and higher calorie intake seems to be a negative thing, may lead to earlier onset. And being sedentary, so low exercise, for example, is associated and may lead to Huntington's coming earlier. So this has made me question maybe there's more to it than just the genetics per se. And if you look at what the Huntington gene does, it affects so many mitochondrial functions. If you can offer a therapy that circumvents the genetic defect and improves the mitochondria a different way, maybe you can slow down the onset and slow down the progression of Huntington's, right?
mm,
So that's the idea. So we applied this to this guy, and again, similar story to our ALS guy. We had a 41-year-old fellow who he had pretty moderately bad Huntington's already. Huntington's is three things. It's a movement disorder, a cognitive disorder, and a behavioral disorder. They get a lot of difficult behavior problems. And he already had evidence of all three
mm,
to a moderate degree. But again, they were desperate because there's really, again, no good treatment for Huntington's. We give them drugs to try and improve the movements, which don't work very well in all honesty, and antipsychotics and things like that to try and calm them down. But it's all very symptom based. So again, he was a thin guy, and he'd already had 5, 6 kilograms of weight loss or something like that in the preceding 12 months. And I was like, do I start a fasting protocol? Sure, let's do it. What's he got to lose?
mm.
So TMAD plus keto diet, same thing we gave the ALS guy, measured him at 0, 6, 12 months. And yeah, his movements again, the movements improved by about 25% by 6 months. They improved by 50% at 12 months.
Wow.
That's pretty massive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, blinded neurologist reviewing this guy. And we had a blinded neuropsychologist reviewing him for his cognitive and behavioral stuff. The cognitive stuff stayed stable, didn't improve, but didn't decline. And the behavioral stuff was really the most interesting because the behavioral symptoms he had suffering from anger, irritability, apathy, terrible things. A lot of it. They were lowered to the, by at least 50% or in some cases 100%, 50 to 100%.
Hmm.
And again, it was a trend. At 6 months, better. At 12 months, even better. So
Hmm.
it's nice to see that trend when you see things because then you know that one day maybe he just had a really great day or a really bad day. But if you see a trend over months, that's nice to see in a N of one case report.
Hmm.
So again, be skeptical, N of one, but it's encouraging. So and again, his weight loss, he lost much less weight on this protocol. Again, similar thing. Huntington's probably a lot of metabolic inefficiency going on in different parts of the brain and body. But maybe we improve that. So all these neurodegenerative disorders, by the by, they're not really just brain disorders. They're whole body disorders. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, Huntington's, they all affect the different parts of the brain and nervous system, but all of them affect the heart. You get degenerative changes in the heart. All of them affect skeletal muscles. So it's not just about the brain stuff. And you look at Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, they affect lots of the internal organs. So there's many reasons, and this makes sense if you view these things as mitochondrial disorders rather than as, single disorders of a certain brain structure, which they're not.
Yeah.
So that's the two case studies, and they were very encouraging. And I was quite nervous of applying a fasting protocol, especially in both these disorders, which are associated with, weight loss and decline, and they're even harder to deal with than Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, probably, arguably.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, that data is out there, and it's quite encouraging. So what we need now is bigger trials.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that would be
Yeah,
great. Thankfully, those issues are conditions are very rare, but
yeah,
hopefully, yeah, we can get some bigger trials going. That would be amazing. I don't know how I don't that would probably be something that we'd want to do in the US, might just
yeah,
as far as getting enough patients is concerned,
yeah,
just from
yeah.
the population side
Well, I've
of
got
things.
some ideas. It's just a
Yeah.
matter of time. My time is my limiting factor, but they are rare, but they're all increasing. So
Yeah.
Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are doubling every
Yeah.
20 to 30 years.
Jesus.
ALS and Huntington's, even Huntington's, and again, this is makes you wonder about the purely genetic nature of it, which I don't believe is true. Um, they're increasing by sort of 50, 60% every 20 years.
Wow.
So in ALS is actually not, it's uncommon, but it's not rare. It's
Okay.
just that people with ALS don't live very long.
Mhm.
So, the prevalence is low, but the incidence, the rate of people developing it is not that low.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then let's do that. You need any help? I'm happy to help with that if
Thank you.
time is a
Well,
factor, and I'm sure we
well,
can
we'll see.
get people as well. Yeah, because that'd be
Appreciate it.
great. That'd be huge. Those sorts of things that
Oh,
people get those diagnoses and they lose all hope because they're not given any, and so getting something
no, they're
done like
not.
this would be huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another thing in medicine. Like, if you stick to what you know in quotations and sell someone with glioblastoma, your average survival time is X, and you don't give them any hope. You offer them a treatment protocol, the standard treatment protocol, but then you say, even with this, your average survival time is X.
Mhm.
It's tough for people. You need to give some hope, even, but be realistic. And so with metabolic therapy, you can honestly say, look, this may work, this may not work, but at least the door is ajar.
Mhm.
And I honestly, that's why I say to people, I honestly don't know if it's going to work, but the theory is good.
Mhm.
I have enough experience now to say, maybe it's a little better than good, but yeah, you've got to give people some hope because that will drive them to improve themselves and do things themselves that they may not have thought they could do. Like a lot of people think at the age of 70 that they can't do a 5-day fast. It's inconceivable,
Mhm.
but they can.
Yeah.
So, you need to have some hope and balance it with some realism, but you must always have some hope
Yeah.
for a person with these terrible disorders, no matter what.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah,
Well, I wanted to touch on it quickly if we had time.
I
Um,
do.
Good. You mentioned the sort of germ theory as opposed to trying to make sure that people are healthy. That's something
Sure.
that's starting to regain popularity. This discussion on germ theory versus terrain theory. I've
Mm.
heard you give some very interesting talks on this subject. Obviously, you don't have to give the whole dissertation, but can you maybe just elucidate for our listeners who haven't come across this discussion and this argument a bit about germ theory versus terrain theory?
I'd be happy to. And this is so crucial.
Mhm.
So it might be the most important thing that I say. So there was this sort of debate in about 200 years ago in France between Louis Pasteur and Antoine Béchamp. Most people have heard of Louis Pasteur. He was this champion of this thing called germ theory. He was a scientist. And Pasteur thought that the origin of disease, a lot of infectious disease at the time, was bacteria, viruses, and so on, and that you had to target these things and eliminate them with drugs, vaccines, whatever. Okay, so there was that. And then, but he had this colleague, Béchamp, who sort of had in a way, the entirely opposite theory. He said, okay, I believe in this thing called host or terrain theory, which is that um, okay, bacteria and viruses exist, but most of the time they're just scavengers. They're not causing a disease if the terrain, i.e., the health of the host, is good. And that made a lot more sense to me when I thought about this because a lot of people don't get sick when the flu comes around or don't get COVID. I guess I'm one of them, and I suspect you probably are too. Like, they don't get sick. And well, why is that? If the germs always cause the disease, Pasteur style germ theory, then everyone who gets the germ should get the disease. And that's false.
Mhm.
So, but at the time, for various reasons, Pasteur sounds like he was a better speaker and he had momentum on his side because, and most of the bad disorders of the day were infectious rather than lifestyle based. His theories won over, and Antoine Béchamp's sort of terrain theory faded into obscurity. And then for the last 200 years, what we've had is germ theory gone on hyperdrive.
Mhm.
So now we apply germ theory not just to infections. We don't just target bacteria and viruses anymore. We're trying to target almost everything. So example would be, diabetes. We're trying to target the blood glucose level. And how do you get the glucose down? You give more insulin. That's a great way to do it, but doesn't help people with diabetes in the long term. Atherosclerosis, so hardening of the arteries, leads to most of the heart attacks and a lot of the strokes. What are we doing there? We're trying to target the LDL cholesterol. We're trying to get that down. Or we're just targeting the clots that form along the vessels when the plaques rupture. We're trying to just eliminate and remove stuff, and it's having limited success. Cancer, we're trying to target the tumors, of course, with our chemo and radiation, and we're trying to now even target the genetic defects with gene therapy. Um, Cancer is more common now than it was even 20 years ago. The neurodegenerative disorders, the big rage is to target the abnormal proteins, different protein for each disorder. So like amyloid and tau and Alzheimer's, alpha-synuclein and Parkinson's and so on. And that's having limited success as well, uh, arguably not much at all.
Mhm.
So what I think has happened in the last 200 years is that germ theory has spilled over into all the non-infectious disorders, and we're still stuck in this germ theory. What we need to balance it out is to balance it out with some terrain theory. Now, the problem with Béchamp is he didn't have Pasteur had targets. He had these bacteria and stuff that he could target, and Béchamp had nothing. He didn't. He had a lot of silly ideas, Béchamp, I have to say, but it was difficult to define the terrain. Uh, Mitochondria were discovered later,
Mhm.
and so if we have now we have this chance for terrain theory to revitalize itself, knowing that mitochondria do so much within our cells, and I see the mitochondria as coordinating cell metabolism and sort of as the main thing that we need to restore. And it's a target of restoration. And you don't target it directly, the mitochondria directly. You target them by applying a blanket therapy like a fast or keto diet or whatever to improve them in a general sense. So if we want to do a lot of good for people with the lifestyle disorders, which are now the problem, infections have gone way down. Lifestyle disorders are killing most people in the West today. I think we need to get a lot of terrain theory going. And that doesn't mean we need to commit the same mistake that we did 200 years ago and get rid of germ theory. No,
Mm,
we can use both. But germ theory is taken to the nth degree at the moment in medicine. Terrain theory is like nobody's heard of it.
mm,
We need to balance these things out. And really, terrain theory should be the A game and the main bulwark for preventing all these disorders. And then we can use germ theory approaches, drugs, and other symptom-based treatments to help people improve in different ways in terms of making them feel better and stuff. But if you want to actually mitigate the core process by improving people's health, terrain theory makes a lot more sense. And that's all about restoring health. Whereas
yeah.
germ theory is about attacking disease.
Yeah. And that's the thing, that's the point that I make is that the natural state of humanity, the natural state of all life is that of health. We were descended from the winners, we're descended from the healthy and the successful, the ones that were the survival of the fittest, the ones that were the fittest, were the strongest, were the healthiest. So when did we become an entire species of sick, dysfunctional creatures that just decay and rot away, unlike any other animal, and unlike ourselves 100 years ago, or unlike
Yeah,
ourselves eating, in a pre-agricultural setting.
yeah,
Um, I think that we've, for many reasons, more recently being um, economic reasons and financial interests, we've started just focusing just on symptoms, and we're not looking for root cause anymore. It's just like, oh, well, here's this problem, here's this pill. We need to find pills because all these problems, like you said, you have these targets. And they're looking for genetic targets. So like, well, we found this little gene. Okay, that's a problem. What does it do? It makes this protein that's defunct. Okay, well, what if you do something that attacks that?
yeah.
Okay, fine. That's pretty clever, trying to figure out those sorts of things. But you're talking about one process in one cellular process in a system that has multi-trillion cells and millions of chemical interactions every single second in every single cell. So yes, maybe that one target is everything, but more likely you're talking about this in the complex of this entire system, and you have to look at that in that way. And right now we're just looking at symptoms. And I mean, it's even been said by Goldman Sachs, is curing people of disease a viable business model? And of course, no, it's not. Because if you cure somebody of a disease, then you can't keep selling them medications to treat the disease. Chris Rock even said this, the comedian. I rewatched an old clip of his back in the '90s from a stand-up routine, and he said, they're never going to cure AIDS. They're never going to cure AIDS because it's like never say never. It's like I'm saying never. They're never going to do it because there's no money in the cure. It's all about, drug dealers are all about the comeback. You have to come back for
Hmm.
more. You got to come back for more. And so if you just cure the disease, it goes. What they're going to do is they're going to get you medicine that you can take every day that allows you to live with the disease. It would never cure the disease so that they have you for the rest of your life. He called it. He called it in the
Hmm.
90s. He saw right through that.
Interesting.
And I think he's exactly right. And then now we have evidence, the Goldman Sachs meeting that got slide that got leaked out. Someone took a picture of it that straight up said, is curing people of disease a viable
Wow.
business model? So that was their words. They're looking
Hmm.
at this. So we know they're not going to try to or cure the disease. They're looking at this from a germ theory point of view. Here's a target. We can treat this with this drug target, and we can have the people on these drugs for the rest of their life, which will recoup our costs and pay for the R&D on the next set of drugs. Fine, that's their business model, but we need to look at it from another point of view. How do we get people better? How do we get people to their natural state, support them so that their body can be healthy and just get rid of this stuff? Because I think that 90% of the deaths in the Western world are from these non-communicable chronic diseases, which I think are, if not entirely, then close to entirely preventable. And if you can prevent it by doing something, well, that means you can actually crawl back some territory, even reverse a lot of these issues as well, using the same techniques if you're addressing the root cause. And so, by by doing that, by just allowing your body to heal and repair, we should be able to get rid of about 80-90% of these issues should people actually, take this on. Um, so it's just a matter of letting your body heal itself. And so what does that mean? That means that we're getting things out of the way that are damaging our body, that are messing up our cellular metabolism, that are messing up our mitochondrial function. Elevated insulin suppresses mitophagy and autophagy. So you very simply keep that down, and now you can recycle and replace and regenerate your mitochondria and other cellular structures. So this is why I think that 90% or so of the issues that we treat are really not diseases. They're not a pathogen with a drug target. They're just environmental exposures, toxins, and toxicities that disrupt our physiology, our cellular mechanism,
Yes.
and
Yes.
make our bodies start to just fall apart, and the wheels start falling off the car if you don't take care of it. And
I
I
fully
think that,
agree. Yeah.
yeah,
I
that's sort of
think
what it is.
the body initially compensates for a lot of these things.
Mm,
You could say insulin resistance is a compensatory thing
yeah.
designed, elicited as a defense mechanism to prevent the cell and mitochondria from getting exposed to too much glucose. So, but as these compensatory things fail, because you keep exposing the body to the wrong things, like a bad diet and lack of fasting, the compensatory mechanisms fail, and then you get into these sort of more severe things, metabolic syndrome, and then if you keep that up, you sort of get into become at risk of atherosclerosis and a lot of cancers and neurodegenerative disorders and so
Mm,
on. So yeah, you're right. I believe if you're right, we shouldn't look at these things as diseases.
mm.
These disorders or conditions should be seen as consequences of abnormal exposure to a lot of bad things in the environment.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And that plays right in with, the train theory. We're damaging the playing field,
Yeah.
and what do you know? Players are tripping. Like, there you go.
Yeah.
So it's
Yep.
makes
That's right.
sense. And then, to further illustrate your point, we know that we're colonized with bacteria all the time, and we know that, MRSA is, a very serious infection that people can get. It's very resistant, as the name suggests. It's resistant to a lot of these antibiotics. But hospital workers can, up to 25% are colonized with MRSA in their nasal passages commonly, and
Hmm.
we're not all dying of MRSA infections and abscesses in our heads. So obviously there's something else going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, great. Well, Matthew, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's always great talking to you. It's always great to see you,
Likewise, Steve. Yeah.
and really appreciate you taking the time. Um, I know that you're doing a lot of great work just because I've spoken to you and seen you, but I mean, as I can see just right behind you, you have a lot of, looks like thank you cards and letters from
Oh,
patients and
yeah.
things like that. So you
Yeah.
can see very clearly that you're having a huge impact on people. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing and continue to do. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. It's always a pleasure to catch up, and I'll
Yeah.
see you at the next conference, whenever that may be.
Absolutely. Is there any way that people can support you, follow your work? Are there any websites or social media pages that people can follow you at?
Yeah, I try to limit my exposure to social media, but I do
Good.
have an account on X,
Okay.
and I always forget the handle. I think it's
Hmm.
at Dr. MCL Phillips or at Dr. Matthew CL Phillips. Try one of those two.
Okay.
And I do have a website, metabolicneurologist.com. That's probably more useful because I put all of our major studies up there, podcast videos like this one will go up there, and there's other tidbits of information for people with certain disorders, and yeah, people can subscribe to a. I
Yeah.
send out a information on our work once in a blue moon
Hmm.
that they can subscribe to that if they want. So
Perfect.
that's it. Just those two sources,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
No, well, yeah, well, you're better off staying away from social media. I absolutely hate it. It's a complete time suck, and but it
Yeah.
does help, sort of get these sorts of things out there. But
You got to do it for what you're doing. So
yeah,
yeah, kudos to you for doing it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, thanks, man. I'll put all those links in the description. So if people want to follow you there, please do. And please go support Matthew's work. He's doing great stuff. Thank you very much. It was great to see you. And
You too.
yeah. And for everybody watching, thank you very much for joining. Hopefully you found that as interesting as I did. Please do send this to someone that you think would be improved by this, at least one person. And please do leave a comment and subscribe if you haven't already, if you like this and want to see more of it. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Hey guys, thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to what I had to say. If you like it, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast. And if you're on YouTube, then please hit that little bell and subscribe, and that'll let you know anytime I have a new video out, which should be every week, if not more. And if you could share this with your friends, that would help me get the word out and let me know that you like what I'm doing. Thanks again, guys.